The sound of boots dragging through dust had become so familiar to Benjamin Ashford that he barely noticed it anymore. But when those boots belonged to him, and every step sent fire shooting through his left leg, he noticed everything. The war had ended 6 months ago, and he had been walking ever since, making his way from the blood-soaked battlefields of Virginia back to the desert heat of Arizona territory. Back to a ranch he wasn't sure would still be standing. Back to a woman he had no right to expect would still be waiting. It was late August 1866, and the sun hung merciless over the rocky terrain as Benjamin crested the final ridge that looked down into the valley, where Oro Blanco sat like a collection of scattered brown boxes against the tan earth. His leg throbbed with each heartbeat, the Confederate bullet still lodged somewhere near his thigh bone, too dangerous to remove according to the field surgeon who had been 3 days drunk when he examined it. Benjamin had fought for the Union, had believed in the cause with everything in him, but the metal in his leg didn't care which side had fired it. The ranch lay another 2 miles beyond the town, and Benjamin paused at the ridge to catch his breath and let his vision clear. Heat shimmered off the desert floor, making everything waver like a mirage, and for a moment he wondered if any of this was real. He had dreamed of this view so many times in the trenches, during the long marches, through the endless nights when men screamed in their sleep, and the smell of death became just another part of breathing. Hannah Whitmore had been 19 when he left, barely more than a girl despite the steel in her spine and the determination in her green eyes. She had stood on the porch of the ranch house her father had built before dying of fever, and she had told Benjamin that she would wait for him, that nothing would make her leave, that she would keep the ranch running no matter what came. He had believed her then because he needed to believe in something other than the war he was riding toward. But 3 years was a long time to ask anyone to wait. Benjamin started down the slope, his hand tight on the walking stick he had carved from an oak branch in Missouri. The stick was smooth now, worn by hundreds of miles of desperate gripping, and it had become as much a part of him as the limp that would never fully heal. He passed a cluster of palo verde trees, their green bark bright against the brown landscape, and startled a roadrunner that shot away in a blur of feathers and indignation. The town of Oro Blanco had grown since he left, or maybe it just seemed that way because he had spent so long looking at nothing but destroyed buildings and burned fields. There was a new mercantile with fresh paint, and someone had built a proper church to replace the tent revival that used to serve as Sunday worship. A few people watched him as he limped down the main street, their faces showing that peculiar mix of curiosity and pity that wounded soldiers had learned to expect. Benjamin Ashford. The voice came from the doorway of the saloon, and Benjamin turned to see Thomas Mercer, who had been too old to fight but young enough to remember everyone who had left. "Thought you might be dead." "Came close," Benjamin said, his own voice sounding strange after hours of silence. "Ranch still standing," Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes dropping to Benjamin's leg. "Miss Hannah kept it going. Had some trouble with raiders last year, but she held them off with her daddy's rifle. Lost some cattle, but the house and barn are fine." Something in Benjamin's chest loosened slightly at the mention of her name, at the confirmation that she was still there, still alive. "She alone out there. Got a couple of ranch hands, Mexican fellas who work for fair wages and loyalty. They been good to her." Thomas paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "She never took up with anyone else, if that is what you are wondering. Turned down 3 proposals that I know of, told every man who asked that she was already spoken for." Benjamin felt his throat tighten. 3 years he had been gone. 3 years of silence broken only by the 2 letters he had managed to send before the war swallowed him into battles that moved too fast for mail to follow. She could have moved on, should have moved on, but apparently Hannah Whitmore was just as stubborn as he remembered. "Much obliged for the information," Benjamin said, and started to turn away. "Benjamin," Thomas called after him. "She is going to want to feed you, let her. You look half-starved." Benjamin nodded and continued down the street, past the church and the small schoolhouse and the blacksmith shop where the clang of hammer on anvil rang out in a rhythm that belonged to peace, not war. The sound almost made him flinch, so similar to artillery in the distance, but he forced himself to keep walking. The ranch road stretched out before him, rutted from wagon wheels and summer storms, lined with mesquite and the occasional brave cactus. His legs screamed at him to stop, to rest, but he had come too far to pause now. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible after years of seeing the world only in variations of mud and blood. He saw the ranch house first, its adobe walls solid and strong, the wooden porch still shaded by the ramada her father had built from cottonwood poles. The barn stood behind it, and beyond that the holding pens for cattle. Chickens scratched in the yard, and a dog began barking somewhere out of sight. Everything looked so normal, so untouched by the war that had consumed the country, that Benjamin felt a sudden surge of anger at the unfairness of it all, followed immediately by crushing gratitude that at least this one place had survived. Then he saw her, and everything else fell away. Hannah sat on the porch in the same rocking chair where her father used to sit, and for a moment Benjamin's heart stopped because she looked exactly as he remembered, and nothing like he remembered all at once. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and she wore a simple cotton dress faded from sun and washing. She was thinner than before, her face carrying the kind of lean hardness that came from work and worry. But her eyes were the same green that had haunted his dreams, and when she looked up and saw him standing at the edge of the yard, those eyes went wide with recognition and something that might have been disbelief. She stood slowly, one hand gripping the porch rail as if she needed the support, and Benjamin realized she was shaking. He took another step forward, then another, closing the distance between the road and the house with his awkward, limping gait. "Benjamin," she said, and her voice broke on his name. "Hannah," he managed, and then he was at the porch steps, looking up at her, this woman who had promised to wait and apparently had meant every word. She came down the steps in a rush, and then her arms were around him, and Benjamin dropped his walking stick to hold her, to bury his face in her hair that smelled like sage soap and sunshine. She was crying, he realized, her shoulders shaking against his chest, and his own eyes burned with tears he had not let himself shed since the war began. "I never left," she said against his shirt, her voice muffled and fierce. "I never left, Benjamin. I stayed right here just like I promised." "I know," he said, though he had not known, not really, not until this moment when she was solid and real in his arms. "I know you did." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the fading light while the chickens continued scratching, and the dog finally came around the corner of the house to investigate. It was a cattle dog, blue heeler mix, and it sniffed at Benjamin's boots with professional interest before apparently deciding he was acceptable. "That is Sam," Hannah said, pulling back enough to look at Benjamin's face, her hands coming up to touch his cheeks, his jaw, his hair, as if she needed to confirm he was real. "Got him last year after the raiders came. He is useless at actually herding but excellent at making noise." Benjamin laughed, the sound rusty and strange, and realized it was the first time he had genuinely laughed in 3 years. "Sounds like a good dog." "You are hurt," Hannah said, her eyes dropping to his leg, to the way he was holding his weight awkwardly to favor his right side. "It is not as bad as it looks," Benjamin lied, and watched her expression shift from joy to something harder, more determined. "Do not lie to me, Benjamin Ashford. I have been running this ranch alone for 3 years. I know hard truth when I see it." She bent to retrieve his walking stick, then slipped under his arm to support his weight. "Come inside. You need food and rest and probably a doctor, though the nearest one is in Tucson and about as useful as teats on a bull." She guided him up the porch steps and into the house, and Benjamin felt a wash of memory so strong it almost staggered him. Everything was the same, from the rough wooden table where he had eaten countless meals, to the fireplace where Hannah's mother had cooked before the fever took her to the bedroom door that stood slightly ajar, revealing the quilt Hannah had been stitching the day he left. "Sit," Hannah ordered, pulling out a chair at the table, and Benjamin sat gratefully, his leg throbbing in time with his heartbeat. She moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire in the stove, pulling out a pot of what looked like stew that had been simmering. She cut thick slices of bread from a loaf on the counter, poured water from a ceramic pitcher, set everything in front of him with a kind of fierce concentration that told him she was fighting to maintain her composure. "Eat," she said. "Then you can tell me everything." Benjamin ate, and the food was the best thing he had tasted in years, even though it was just venison stew and bread. He ate slowly, aware that his stomach had shrunk from years of poor rations, and watched Hannah as she moved around the kitchen, tidying things that did not need tidying, her hands never quite still. When he finally pushed the bowl away, she sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. "Tell me," she said simply. So he did. He told her about the journey to join his regiment in New Mexico, about the battles at Valverde and Glorieta Pass, about being transferred east to join the main fighting. He told her about the mud and the cold of Virginia, about men dying from disease as much as bullets, about the field hospitals where the screams never stopped. He told her about the day he took the bullet in his leg, about lying in the mud convinced he was going to die, about the field surgeon who told him he would never walk right again. He did not tell her about the nightmares, about waking up reaching for a rifle that was not there, about the way sudden noises still made him want to hit the ground. Some things were too raw, too new, and he was not sure he had words for them anyway. Hannah listened without interrupting, her green eyes never leaving his face, and when he finally fell silent, she reached across the table and took his hand. "You are home now," she said. "Whatever else happens, you are home." Benjamin squeezed her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her fingers. "I should not have expected you to wait. 3 years is too long to ask of anyone." "You did not ask," Hannah said firmly. "I decided, and I would decide the same thing again every time." She paused, her thumb rubbing across his knuckles. "I am not the same girl you left, Benjamin. This ranch nearly broke me a dozen times. I had to learn to shoot, to bargain with cattle buyers who thought they could cheat me, to face down men who thought a woman alone was easy prey. I am harder now, and I do not apologize for it." "I would not want you to," Benjamin said honestly. "I am not the same man who left either. War changes things." "Then we will learn each other again," Hannah said, and the simplicity of it, the pure faith in those words, made Benjamin's chest ache. They sat there as the light faded outside, hands joined across the table, until Hannah finally stirred and began lighting lamps. "You should rest. The guest room is ready, has been ready since the day you left." "Hannah," Benjamin started, not sure what he wanted to say but feeling like something needed to be acknowledged, some boundary crossed or promise renewed. She turned to look at him, lamplight catching in her eyes. "We have time, Benjamin. Whatever you need to say, whatever we need to figure out, we have time now. The war is over. You are home. Everything else can wait." She showed him to the guest room, which was small but clean, with a real bed and cotton sheets that smelled like desert wind. Benjamin lowered himself onto the mattress with a groan of relief, and Hannah knelt to help him remove his boots, her hands gentle on the worn leather. "I will look at that leg properly tomorrow," she said. "Tonight, just rest." Benjamin caught her hand before she could stand. "Thank you," he said. "For waiting, for staying, for everything." Hannah leaned forward and pressed a kiss to his forehead, soft and brief. "Welcome home, Benjamin Ashford." Then she was gone, the door closing quietly behind her, and Benjamin lay back against the pillows and closed his eyes. He expected the nightmares, the dreams of battle and death that had plagued him every night since the war, but instead he slept deeply and dreamlessly, the first real rest he had known in years. He woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment he was disoriented, reaching instinctively for weapons that were not there, but then memory flooded back and he relaxed into the mattress. Home. He was home. His leg protested when he swung it off the bed, but he gritted his teeth and stood, using the bedpost for support. His walking stick was propped against the wall where Hannah must have placed it, and he grabbed it gratefully before making his way to the kitchen. Hannah stood at the stove, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she turned to smile at him when he entered. "Morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in 3 years," Benjamin admitted, lowering himself into a chair. "Is it always this quiet here?" "Usually. The hands will be in from checking the herd soon, but mornings are peaceful." She set a plate in front of him. Eggs and bacon and fried potatoes, more food than he could remember seeing at one meal. "I want to look at your leg after you eat." Benjamin nodded, already working his way through the food. He was still eating when the door opened and 2 men came in, dusty from riding, both stopping short when they saw him at the table. "Carlos, Miguel, this is Benjamin Ashford," Hannah said smoothly. "Benjamin, these are the men I told you about. They have been invaluable these past 2 years." The older of the two, Carlos, nodded respectfully. He was probably in his 40s, with gray streaking his dark hair and the kind of steady eyes that spoke of reliability. "Welcome home, Senor. Miss Hannah spoke of you often." The younger one, Miguel, looked barely 20, with quick movements and an easier smile. "She never gave up on you coming back." "I am grateful you were here to help her," Benjamin said, meaning it. The thought of Hannah facing raiders alone made his blood run cold. "She helped us first," Carlos said simply. "When others would not hire Mexicans for fair wages, she did. We remember loyalty." The men poured coffee and made their reports to Hannah, discussing cattle counts, an offense that needed mending, and some concern about a mountain lion that had been seen near the herd. Hannah listened carefully, asking questions and making decisions with a confidence that Benjamin found both impressive and slightly intimidating. This was not the girl he had left, not entirely. This was a woman who had learned to run a ranch and command respect, and he felt a surge of pride mixed with the strange sensation of being slightly lost in his own life. After Carlos and Miguel headed back out, Hannah turned to Benjamin with that determined expression he was learning meant she would not be argued with. "Show me your leg." Benjamin hesitated, then stood and worked his belt loose, pushing his trousers down enough to reveal the angry red scar on his left thigh. The bullet wound had healed badly, leaving a puckered line of scar tissue that was still tender to the touch. The skin around it was discolored, and sometimes he could feel the bullet moving when he walked, a grinding sensation that made his stomach turn. Hannah drew in a sharp breath but did not look away. She knelt beside him, her fingers hovering over the scar without quite touching. "The bullet is still in there," surgeon said. "Taking it out might kill me. Seemed safer to leave it. And this is why you limp: muscle damage, nerve damage. I am lucky I can walk at all, according to the doctors." Hannah sat back on her heels, her jaw tight. "Does it hurt all the time?" "Mostly. Worse when I have been on it too long." Benjamin pulled his trousers back up, feeling suddenly vulnerable. "I know it is not what you expected when I left." Hannah stood and faced him, her eyes blazing. "What I expected was that you might not come back at all. What I expected was a letter telling me you were dead in some field in Virginia. You are alive, Benjamin. You are here. Everything else is just details we will figure out." "It is more than details, Hannah. I cannot work the ranch the way I used to. I cannot ride long hours or rope cattle or do half the things that need doing." "So we adapt," Hannah said firmly. "Carlos and Miguel handle the heavy work. You can manage the books, handle the buying and selling, plan the operations. We make it work together." She stepped closer, her hand coming up to rest on his chest. "Unless you do not want to stay, unless you came back out of obligation rather than desire." Benjamin caught her hand, holding it against his heart. "I thought about you every day I was gone. When things were at their worst, when I thought I would not survive another battle, it was the thought of you that kept me going. I came back because I love you, Hannah Whitmore, and I have loved you since you were 16 years old and tried to ride that wild Mustang your father told you to leave alone." Hannah laughed, a surprised sound that was half sob. "I broke my arm in 2 places. You also refused to cry, even though I could see how much it hurt." Benjamin brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "You have always been the strongest person I know." "I am not strong," Hannah said, but there were tears on her cheeks now. "I was terrified every single day you were gone. I used to have nightmares about men coming to tell me you were dead. I almost broke 100 times. But you did not break," Benjamin said. "You are still here. The ranch is still here. That is strength, Hannah." She moved into his arms then, and he held her while she cried. This woman who had shouldered so much alone for so long. They stood there in the kitchen with the morning sun pouring through the windows, and Benjamin felt something he had not felt since before the war, something that might have been hope. Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Benjamin handled the ranch accounts, which had been kept in Hannah's careful handwriting in a ledger that lived on the kitchen table. He reviewed bills of sale and tallied expenses, and planned the next cattle drive to Tucson. Hannah showed him the improvements she had made, the new irrigation system for the kitchen garden, the reinforced barn doors, the root cellar she had dug with Carlos and Miguel's help. They worked side by side, and slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild what the war had interrupted. There were awkward moments, times when Benjamin woke gasping from nightmares, and Hannah had to calm him back to reality. Times when the pain in his leg made him short-tempered and frustrated. But there were also good moments. Evenings on the porch watching the sunset, mornings sharing coffee before the day began, stolen conversations that lasted long into the night. 3 weeks after his return, Benjamin found Hannah in the barn mending tack, her hands moving with practiced skill through the leather straps. He had been working up his courage all day for what he needed to say, and now seemed as good a time as any. "Hannah," he said, and she looked up with that quick smile that still made his heart skip. "I need to ask you something." She set down the leather and gave him her full attention. "What is it?" Benjamin reached into his pocket and pulled out the small box he had carried all the way from Virginia. He had bought the ring before the war, had planned to propose the day he left, but had chickened out at the last moment, afraid to bind her to him when he might not return. Now he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone, the blue-green stone mined from these very Arizona mountains. "I should have asked you 3 years ago," he said. "I should have given you this before I left, should have made my intentions clear. But I was afraid and I was young, and I thought I was protecting you by keeping silent." He took a breath, his hands not quite steady. "Hannah Whitmore, I am still afraid and I am still young, and I am definitely not the man I was when I left. But I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person, and if you will have me, broken leg and nightmares and all, I would be honored to be your husband." Hannah stared at the ring, then at his face, and for a terrible moment Benjamin thought she might say no. Then she launched herself at him with enough force to make him stagger back, her arms around his neck, her face buried against his shoulder. "Yes," she said, her voice muffled and fierce. "Yes, you stubborn, beautiful, idiotic man. Yes, I will marry you." Benjamin held her tight, relief and joy flooding through him in equal measure. "I am not beautiful," he managed, "and I am definitely idiotic." Hannah pulled back enough to look at him, and she was laughing and crying at the same time. "You are beautiful to me. You always have been." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Benjamin felt the last tight knot in his chest finally loosen. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, the turquoise catching the light from the barn door. Hannah held her hand up to admire it, then kissed him again, longer this time, deeper, until they were both breathless and grinning like fools. "When?" Hannah asked. "When should we get married?" "As soon as you want," Benjamin said. "Tomorrow, if you like. I have already waited 3 years." "I do not want to wait any longer." Hannah laughed. "I need at least a week to make arrangements. And I want a real wedding, Benjamin, not some rushed affair. I want the church and the reverend and the whole town there to witness it. Then we will have the biggest wedding Oro Blanco has ever seen," Benjamin promised, and kissed her again because he could, because she was his and he was hers, and the war was over and they were home. The wedding took place 2 weeks later on a clear September morning, when the desert heat had finally broken into something almost cool. Hannah wore a dress she had sewn herself from cream-colored silk that a sympathetic merchant in Tucson had sold her at cost, and she carried wildflowers that Miguel had gathered from the high country. Benjamin wore his best suit, carefully brushed to remove any trace of dust, and tried not to limp too obviously as he stood at the altar waiting for her to walk down the aisle. The church was packed, every seat filled with ranchers and townspeople, and even a few travelers who had stopped in Oro Blanco at exactly the right time to witness a wedding. Carlos and Miguel sat in the front row, their faces solemn with pride, and Thomas Mercer stood as Benjamin's best man, having insisted on the honor when Benjamin admitted he had no family left to ask. Then the doors opened and Hannah appeared, and Benjamin forgot how to breathe. She was radiant, her dark hair pinned up with small white flowers, her green eyes bright with joy. She walked toward him alone, having no father to give her away, and Benjamin thought that was fitting because Hannah had always been her own woman, had never needed anyone to give her permission to do anything. The Reverend was a kind-faced man named Samuel Morrison, who had served as a chaplain during the war and understood what it meant for men to come home. He kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt, speaking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. When it came time for the vows, Benjamin spoke as clearly, his voice only shaking slightly, promising to love and honor Hannah for all his days. Hannah spoke her vows with that same fierce determination she brought to everything, her hand tight in his, and when Reverend Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed her to a round of applause and cheering from the assembled crowd. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by half the town. There was roasted beef and fresh bread, vegetables from the kitchen gardens, pies and cakes, and even a small barrel of whiskey that Thomas had donated. Musicians appeared with fiddles and a guitar, and soon people were dancing in the yard while the sun set in shades of orange and red. Benjamin danced with his wife, moving slowly to accommodate his leg, and Hannah rested her head on his shoulder and told him this was the happiest day of her life. He believed her because it was his happiest day too, this moment of joy after so much darkness. As the party wound down and guests began heading back to town, Carlos approached Benjamin with a serious expression. "May I speak with you, Señor? Of course. And please call me Benjamin." Carlos nodded. "Benjamin, then. I wanted to tell you that Miguel and I are planning to stay on if you will have us. We know you are back now and might want to run the ranch differently, but we have come to care for this place. It feels like home." Benjamin clasped the older man's shoulder. "This ranch would have failed without you two. Of course I want you to stay. You are family now as far as I am concerned." Carlos's eyes brightened, and he gripped Benjamin's hand firmly. "Thank you. We will not let you down. I know you will not." After the last guest departed, Benjamin and Hannah stood on the porch watching the stars emerge. The desert night was cool and clear, the sky so full of stars it seemed impossible they could all fit. Hannah leaned against Benjamin's side, her head on his shoulder, and they stood in comfortable silence. "I used to stand here every night you were gone," Hannah said softly. "I would look at the stars and try to imagine you seeing the same stars wherever you were. It made me feel less alone." "I did the same thing," Benjamin admitted. "In the camps, when the fighting stopped for the night, I would look up and think about you looking at the same sky." "We were connected even when we were apart," Hannah said. "We always will be," Benjamin promised. They went inside together, and for the first time since Benjamin's return, they went to the main bedroom, the one that had belonged to Hannah's parents, and then to Hannah alone. She lit a lamp and turned to face him, suddenly shy in a way he had not seen since they were teenagers. "I am nervous," she admitted. "Is that foolish?" "I am nervous too," Benjamin said honestly. He moved closer, cupping her face in his hands. "We can wait if you want. There is no rush." "I have waited 3 years," Hannah said, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "I do not want to wait any more." She kissed him, and Benjamin let himself get lost in her, in the taste and feel of her, in the reality that she was his wife, and they had the rest of their lives ahead of them. They learned each other slowly that night, with tenderness and patience and the kind of deep connection that came from truly knowing another person. Benjamin's leg ached and his scars were ugly, and there were moments of awkwardness, but Hannah never flinched, never pulled away. She touched his scars with gentle fingers and told him they were proof he had survived, proof he had come back to her. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Hannah's head on Benjamin's chest, his arms around her. Benjamin felt more at peace than he had in years, the nightmares held at bay by her presence. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret this," Hannah said, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin. "You are my home, Benjamin Ashford. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and when Benjamin woke in the early morning light, it was not from nightmares but from the simple pleasure of being alive and being loved. The months that followed were not easy, but they were good. Benjamin struggled with his leg, with days when the pain was so intense he could barely leave the bed. Hannah struggled with the ranch, with drought and difficult cattle buyers and a pack of coyotes that killed 3 calves before Miguel managed to shoot the alpha. But they struggled together, and that made all the difference. Benjamin discovered he had a talent for the business side of ranching, for negotiating prices and planning drives and managing the books. He could not do the physical labor anymore, but he could make sure the ranch ran smoothly in other ways. Hannah continued to oversee the daily operations, working alongside Carlos and Miguel, her hands as calloused as theirs. They hired 2 more men in the spring of 1867, young cowboys looking for steady work, and the ranch began to truly prosper. Benjamin made a deal with a buyer in Tucson for regular cattle sales, and Hannah started breeding horses on the side, focusing on sturdy ranch horses that could handle the desert terrain. The money was not extravagant, but it was steady, and for the first time since her father died, Hannah did not have to worry about whether they could make it through another year. On their first anniversary, Benjamin surprised Hannah with a trip to Tucson. They stayed in a real hotel with clean sheets and hot baths, and Benjamin took her to dinner at the finest restaurant in town. It was not fancy by Eastern standards, but to them, it felt like the height of luxury. "I have something to tell you," Hannah said over dessert, her eyes bright with something that might have been excitement or nervousness. Benjamin set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," she said simply. "About 3 months along, I think. The baby should come in early spring." Benjamin stared at her, the words not quite processing. "Pregnant," he repeated. "You are having a baby. We are having a baby." Hannah nodded, and now he could see she was definitely nervous, her hands twisting in her lap. "I know we have not talked about children much. I know things have been difficult with your leg and the ranch and everything else. But I am happy about this, Benjamin. I want this baby." "I am happy too," Benjamin said, and realized he meant it completely. The thought of Hannah carrying his child, of becoming a father, filled him with a joy so profound it almost frightened him. "I am terrified, but I am happy." Hannah laughed, relief clear on her face. "I am terrified too, but we will figure it out just like we have figured out everything else." They went back to the ranch the next day, and Benjamin immediately began making plans. He built a cradle in the barn, working slowly and carefully to make sure every joint was perfect. Hannah sewed baby clothes and blankets, her hands moving constantly whenever she had a spare moment. Carlos's wife, Maria, who lived in town and whom Benjamin had not met until the wedding, came out to the ranch regularly to check on Hannah and offer advice about pregnancy and childbirth. As Hannah's belly grew, Benjamin found himself watching her constantly, marveling at the changes in her body, at the life growing inside her. He would place his hand on her stomach and feel the baby move, and it seemed like a miracle every single time. The baby came in March 1868, on a night when spring storms rolled across the desert and lightning split the sky. Benjamin paced outside the bedroom while Maria and a midwife from town attended Hannah, every cry from inside the room making his heart clench with fear. He remembered the screams from field hospitals, remembered men dying in agony, and he had to force himself to stay outside, to trust that Maria knew what she was doing. Carlos stayed with him, solid and calm, and at some point Miguel appeared with coffee that Benjamin drank without tasting. The night seemed to last forever, lightning flashing and thunder rolling while Benjamin prayed to a God he was not sure he still believed in. Then, as dawn was breaking, a new sound joined the storm. A baby crying, strong and angry, and Maria appeared in the doorway with a smile on her face. "You have a son," she said, "and your wife is asking for you." Benjamin practically ran into the room, his leg protesting every step. Hannah lay in the bed, exhausted and sweaty and more beautiful than he had ever seen her, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. She looked up when he entered, and the smile on her face was pure radiance. "Benjamin, meet your son." Benjamin moved to the bed, his hands shaking as he looked down at the tiny person in Hannah's arms. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused dark blue eyes, his little face scrunched and red. He had a shock of dark hair and tiny perfect fingers that gripped reflexively when Benjamin touched them. "He is so small," Benjamin whispered, afraid to speak too loudly. "He is perfect," Hannah said firmly. "Would you like to hold him?" Benjamin wanted to say he was afraid he would drop the baby, that his hands were too rough, that he did not know how. But Hannah was already transferring the bundle into his arms, and then he was holding his son, this tiny life that he and Hannah had created together. The baby made a small sound, and Benjamin felt his heart crack wide open. All the darkness of the war, all the pain and loss and death, seemed suddenly worthwhile because it had led him here to this moment, to this family. "What should we name him?" he asked, unable to look away from his son's face. "I was thinking James," Hannah said softly, "after my father, James Ashford." "James," Benjamin repeated, testing the name. "I like it. James Ashford, welcome to the world." The baby yawned, a tiny perfect yawn, and Benjamin laughed with pure joy. Raising James turned out to be both harder and more wonderful than Benjamin had imagined. The baby demanded constant attention, waking every few hours to eat, crying for reasons they could not always decipher. Hannah was exhausted, and Benjamin did what he could to help despite his leg, learning to change diapers and rock James to sleep. But there were also moments of such perfect happiness that Benjamin could hardly believe they were real. Watching James smile for the first time, seeing him reach for Hannah's face, holding him while he slept, and feeling the absolute trust of this tiny person. Benjamin had survived a war, had walked hundreds of miles on a damaged leg, had fought his way back from the edge of death, and it had all been for this. For these quiet mornings with his wife and son, for this family they had built together. As James grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They bought more land, expanded the herd, built a bigger barn. Carlos and Miguel became uncles to James, teaching him Spanish words and how to recognize animal tracks. The ranch hands they had hired became fixtures, reliable men who worked hard and stayed loyal. Benjamin's leg never fully healed, and some days the pain was bad enough that he could barely walk, but he adapted. He used his cane without shame, focused on the work he could do, and tried not to resent the limitations. Hannah never made him feel less for his injury, never suggested he was not pulling his weight, and that made all the difference. On James's second birthday, Hannah told Benjamin she was pregnant again. This time he did not need a moment to process, did not feel the shock of the first announcement. He simply pulled her into his arms and told her he loved her, told her their family was the greatest gift he had ever received. Their daughter was born in January 1870, on a clear cold morning when frost covered the desert plants. The birth was easier than James's had been, or maybe it just seemed that way because Benjamin knew what to expect. He held his daughter, Eleanor Grace Ashford, named for Hannah's mother, and marveled at how something so tiny could be so perfect. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly, to help feed her and rock her. Benjamin and Hannah had to watch him carefully to make sure his enthusiasm did not overwhelm the baby. But James was gentle in his way, his 2-year-old hands surprisingly careful. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The ranch was busy, always something needing attention, but they made it work. Benjamin handled the accounts and negotiations, Hannah managed the daily operations, and Carlos and Miguel kept everything running smoothly. They hired a woman from town, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese widow who needed work, to help with the children and the house, and she became another member of their extended family. The years passed in a blur of work and love, and the simple pleasures of watching their children grow. James turned out to be adventurous and bold, always climbing things he should not, always wanting to help with the horses. Eleanor was quieter, more thoughtful, with a deep curiosity about everything around her. She collected rocks and feathers, asked endless questions, and followed her father around the ranch whenever he would let her. In 1872, when James was 4 and Eleanor 2, Hannah found Benjamin in the barn one evening, staring at nothing, his hands clenched on his cane. "Bad day?" she asked gently, having learned to read his moods. "Just remembering," Benjamin said. "It has been 6 years since the war ended, but some days it feels like yesterday." Hannah moved to stand beside him, not touching but close enough that he could feel her presence. "What brought it on?" "Thunder this afternoon. Sounded like artillery." Benjamin laughed bitterly. "Foolish, I know. I should be over it by now." "It is not foolish," Hannah said firmly. "You lived through hell, Benjamin. You are allowed to have days when it catches up to you. I have you and the children. I have this ranch, this life. I should be happy all the time. You are human. You are allowed to be both happy and haunted." Hannah took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "The war is part of you, part of what made you who you are. I do not love you despite that. I love all of you, scars and nightmares included." Benjamin turned to look at her, this woman who had waited for him, who had built a life with him, who loved him with a fierceness that still took his breath away. "How did I get so lucky?" "You walked hundreds of miles on a damaged leg to get home to me," Hannah said. "That is not luck. That is determination." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and felt the darkness recede a little. It would come back, he knew. The memories would always be there, the nightmares would always find him sometimes. But he had Hannah, and he had their children, and he had this life they had built together. That was enough. That was everything. In 1874, the ranch faced its biggest challenge yet. A drought hit Arizona territory hard, drying up water sources and making grazing difficult. Cattle died, and several smaller ranches went under, their owners selling out to larger operations or simply abandoning their land. Benjamin and Hannah had a heated discussion about whether to sell some of their herd to ensure they could keep the ranch running. Benjamin wanted to be cautious, to cut their losses early, but Hannah was determined to hold on. "This ranch is everything my father worked for," she said, her jaw set in that stubborn way Benjamin knew well. "I did not keep it going through 3 years of war and raiders and every other disaster just to give up now." "I am not suggesting we give up," Benjamin argued. "I am suggesting we be smart. If we sell half the herd now, we can weather the drought and rebuild when the rains come. And if the rains come next month, if we sell now and the drought breaks, we will have given up for nothing." They went back and forth, tension rising between them in a way it rarely did. Finally, Carlos intervened, suggesting a compromise. They would drive the cattle to higher elevations where grazing was better, a risky move but one that might save the herd without selling. It was Miguel who volunteered to lead the drive, taking 2 of the ranch hands and spending weeks in the high country keeping the cattle alive. Benjamin hated being unable to go himself, hated that his leg kept him from doing the physical work, but he had to trust that Miguel knew what he was doing. The drought finally broke in late September with storms that turned the dry washes into raging torrents. Miguel and the hands brought the herd back down, thinner but alive, and the ranch survived. Benjamin made sure Miguel got a significant bonus and a permanent raise, and the young cowboy who had been barely 20 when Benjamin first met him was now a full partner in the ranch operations. That Christmas was the best Benjamin could remember. The whole ranch family gathered, including Carlos and Maria and their 3 children, Miguel and his new wife Rosa, the ranch hands, and Mrs. Chen. They cooked a feast and exchanged small gifts, and James and Alina performed a song they had learned from Mrs. Chen. It was loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. Benjamin stood on the porch afterward, watching the stars, and felt Hannah slip her arms around him from behind. "Happy?" she asked. "Beyond measure," Benjamin said honestly. "Some days I still cannot believe this is my life." "Believe it," Hannah said. "You earned every bit of it." The years continued to pass. James grew into a lanky boy who could ride as well as any of the hands, who helped with the cattle and dreamed of running the ranch someday. Alina became a voracious reader, going through every book they could get her, and showed a talent for drawing that had her sketching the desert landscape in remarkable detail. In 1876, for the centennial of American independence, Oro Blanco put on a celebration that drew people from all over the territory. There were races and competitions, food and dancing, and a speech by the territorial governor. Benjamin and Hannah brought the children into town for the festivities, and Benjamin found himself reflecting on how much had changed in the 10 years since he returned from the war. The country was still healing, still dealing with the aftermath of that terrible conflict, but life went on. New states were being added, the railroad was spreading west, and people were building lives in places that had been wilderness a generation before. Benjamin's legs still hurt every day, and he still had nightmares sometimes, but they were farther apart now, less intense. He had learned to live with his scars, both visible and invisible. That night, after they returned home and put the children to bed, Benjamin and Hannah sat on the porch as they had done so many times before. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked. "Staying here, waiting for me, tying yourself to a man with a bad leg and worse memories?" Hannah turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I have never regretted a single moment. You gave me a life I could never have imagined, Benjamin. You gave me children and partnership and love. What is there to regret? I just want to make sure you are happy," Benjamin said, "that I have given you enough." "You have given me everything," Hannah said firmly. She took his hand, placing it over her heart. "Feel that. That beats for you, Benjamin Ashford." "It always has, from the moment I was old enough to understand what love was. You are my heart, my home, my everything. Do not doubt that." Benjamin pulled her close, kissing her with all the love and gratitude he felt. After all these years, she could still make him feel like the luckiest man alive. In 1878, when James was 10 and Alina 8, Benjamin's nightmares came back with a vengeance. He did not know what triggered them, but suddenly he was back in the war, reliving battles and watching men die. He would wake up screaming, disoriented and reaching for weapons, and Hannah would have to talk him back to reality. The children were scared, not understanding why their father was suddenly different, and Benjamin hated himself for frightening them. He tried to hide it, to suppress the nightmares through sheer willpower, but that only made things worse. Finally, Hannah insisted he talk to Reverend Morrison, who had been a chaplain and understood what soldiers went through. Benjamin resisted at first, not wanting to burden anyone else with his problems, but Hannah was relentless. "You are not alone in this," she told him. "Other men have come back from war with the same struggles. Let someone help you." So Benjamin went to see Reverend Morrison, and over several long conversations, he began to understand that what he was experiencing was not weakness or failure, but a natural response to trauma. The Reverend suggested he write down his memories, get them out of his head and onto paper, and though it was painful, Benjamin found it helped. He filled journal after journal with his war experiences, and slowly the nightmares began to subside again. They never went away completely, but they became manageable, and Benjamin learned to recognize his triggers and cope with them. James and Alina adjusted as children do, accepting that sometimes father had bad nights, but it did not mean he loved them any less. Benjamin made sure to spend extra time with them, to show them through actions that he was still their father, still present and engaged in their lives. In 1880, Carlos and Maria decided to retire and move to Tucson to be closer to their daughter and grandchildren. It was an emotional parting, as Carlos had been with the ranch for over a decade, but Benjamin and Hannah understood. They threw a big farewell party, and Benjamin gave Carlos a generous retirement bonus, enough to buy a small house in Tucson with money left over. "You saved this ranch," Benjamin told Carlos at the party. "You kept it running when Hannah was alone, and you helped me when I came back broken. I will never forget that." Carlos embraced him, tears in his eyes. "You gave us dignity and fair pay when others would not. You treated us like family." "We will never forget that either." Miguel stepped up to fill Carlos's role as foreman, and he proved more than capable. The ranch continued to thrive under his management, and Benjamin was able to focus more on the business side and on spending time with his family. In 1881, Hannah became pregnant again, a surprise after so many years. She was 34 now, older than she had been with the previous pregnancies, and Benjamin worried about her health. But Hannah was determined to see it through, and in March 1882 she gave birth to twin boys, Henry and Thomas. The twins were a handful from the start, energetic and loud and constantly getting into trouble. James and Alina helped look after them, now old enough to be real assistants rather than just another set of hands needing attention. The house was fuller and louder than ever, and Benjamin loved every chaotic moment. With 4 children and a thriving ranch, life was busy in the best possible way. Benjamin was 40 years old now, his hair starting to gray at the temples, his leg bothering him more as he aged, but he had never been happier. He would watch Hannah with the children, see her laughing at something the twins had done, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. In 1885, when James was 17 and talking about taking over more of the ranch operations, Benjamin sat him down for a serious conversation. "This ranch will be yours someday," Benjamin told his son. "Yours and your siblings, but I want to make sure you understand what that means. It is not just land and cattle. It is responsibility. It is treating your workers fairly, managing your resources wisely, and never forgetting that other people depend on you." James nodded seriously, his young face earnest. "I understand, Father. I have been watching you and Mother my whole life. I know what it takes. You have a good heart," Benjamin said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "That is the most important thing. Everything else you can learn." Alina showed no interest in ranching, but she had developed a real talent for art. Benjamin arranged for her to take lessons from a traveling painter who passed through Oro Blanco, and her drawings became good enough that people started asking to buy them. She painted landscapes and portraits, capturing the beauty of the desert in ways that amazed Benjamin. The twins, still young, were too early to tell what they would become, but they showed the same determination and spirit that characterized the whole family. In 1888, Benjamin and Hannah celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. They had a quiet dinner, just the two of them while Mrs. Chen watched the children and reflected on the life they had built. 20 years, Hannah said, shaking her head in wonder. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." Best 20 years of my life, Benjamin said, raising his glass to her. Even with the nightmares and the drought and all the struggles, especially with those, Benjamin said, they made the good times sweeter. They taught us we could survive anything together. Hannah reached across the table to take his hand. I love you, Benjamin Ashford. I loved you when you left for war. I loved you when you came back broken. And I love you now with all our history and scars and memories. Nothing will ever change that. I love you too, Benjamin said, his throat tight with emotion. You are the reason I made it home. The reason I kept walking when I wanted to give up. You are my everything, Hannah. They went home that night and made love with the tenderness and familiarity of two people who knew each other completely, who had learned every inch of each other's bodies and souls. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed, Benjamin felt at peace in a way he had never imagined possible during those dark war years. The ranch continued to prosper through the late 1880s and into the 1890s. James took over more and more of the daily operations, proving himself a capable manager. Eleanor married a teacher from Tucson in 1892, a kind man named David Foster who appreciated her artistic talent and encouraged her to continue painting. The twins grew into strong young men, both showing an interest in horse breeding that led Benjamin to expand that part of the ranch operations. Miguel retired in 1895, having worked for the ranch for nearly 30 years. Benjamin and Hannah threw him and Rosa a party that rivaled the one they had thrown for Carlos and Maria, and Benjamin made sure Miguel had a comfortable retirement. Several of the men who had worked for the ranch over the years attended, a testament to the loyalty and respect Benjamin and Hannah had earned through fair treatment and honest dealing. In 1896, Benjamin turned 55, and his leg was bothering him more than ever. There were days when he could barely walk, when the pain was so intense that even laudanum barely touched it. Hannah would find him in the barn or the office, his face gray with pain, and she would help him to bed without comment or judgment. I am getting old, Benjamin said one such evening, frustrated with his body's betrayal. We are both getting old, Hannah said practically. She was 49 now, her dark hair heavily streaked with gray, her face lined from years in the desert sun. But we are getting old together, which is more than we dared hope for when you came home from that war. I wanted to give you more, Benjamin said. I wanted to be the man I was before I left. You have given me more than I ever dreamed of, Hannah said firmly. 4 children, a successful ranch, 30 years of love and partnership. What more could I possibly want? Benjamin pulled her down beside him on the bed, holding her close. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Hannah Ashford. And you are mine, she said, kissing him softly. Now stop being maudlin and rest. Your leg will feel better tomorrow. She was right, as she usually was. The pain subsided to manageable levels, and Benjamin continued to oversee the ranch operations with James's help. In 1900, as the new century dawned, the family gathered for a photograph. It was a new technology, still expensive and complicated, but Benjamin wanted a record of this moment, this family they had built. The photographer came out from Tucson with his equipment, and they all posed in front of the ranch house. Benjamin and Hannah sat in chairs in the center, their 4 children arranged around them. James stood behind Benjamin's chair, solid and reliable at 32, with his wife Martha and their 2 children beside him. Eleanor stood next to Hannah, her husband David's arm around her shoulders, their infant daughter in her arms. The twins, now 18 and about to head to university in California, flanked the group, tall and handsome young men. Looking at the photograph later, Benjamin was struck by how much they had all accomplished. From the desperate hope of a wounded soldier limping home and a woman who refused to give up, they had built this family, this legacy. The ranch would continue, passing from generation to generation, and the love he and Hannah shared would be the foundation of it all. In 1902, Hannah fell ill with pneumonia. It started as a simple cold, but in the dry desert air and at her age it quickly became serious. Benjamin sat by her bedside for days, holding her hand, talking to her even when she was too fevered to respond. The children came, all 4 of them, and they took turns watching over their mother. For a terrifying week, Benjamin thought he might lose her, and he realized that despite surviving war and injury and every hardship life had thrown at them, losing Hannah would be the one thing he could not bear. He prayed desperately, bargaining with a God he had questioned for years, promising anything if Hannah would just survive. She did survive, slowly recovering under the care of a doctor from Tucson, and with the devoted attention of her family. When she was finally well enough to sit up and eat on her own, Benjamin broke down and cried, overwhelmed with relief. "I thought I was going to lose you," he admitted, not caring that his children could hear. "You are not getting rid of me that easily," Hannah said, her voice weak but her eyes bright. "I waited for you to come home from war. You can wait a little while for me to recover from a cold." "That was more than a cold," Benjamin said, but he was smiling through his tears. "Details," Hannah said, and everyone laughed, the tension finally breaking. Hannah's recovery took months, and she was never quite as strong afterward, but she slowly regained her health. Benjamin made sure she did not overwork herself, that she had help with anything strenuous, and Hannah tolerated his fussing with good humor. In 1905, on a warm spring evening, Benjamin and Hannah sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. They were both in their late 50s now, showing the wear of their years but still strong in the ways that mattered. "You remember the day you came home?" Hannah asked suddenly. "Every detail," Benjamin said. "I remember seeing you on this porch and thinking you looked like hope itself." "I remember thinking you looked half dead and completely beautiful," Hannah said. "I remember being so afraid you were a dream that I would blink and you would disappear." "I remember you saying you never left," Benjamin said softly. "Those words kept me going for years." "I meant them," Hannah said. "I still mean them. Through everything, I have never wanted to be anywhere but here with you." Benjamin took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "We built something good here, did not we?" "We built something wonderful," Hannah corrected. "And it will continue after we are gone. James will keep the ranch going, the twins are making names for themselves, Alina is raising her family. We created a legacy, Benjamin." "We created a family," Benjamin said. "Everything else is just details." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the desert they both loved. The ranch was quiet, the day's work done, and in the distance they could hear the lowing of cattle and the sound of horses in the corral. It was a peaceful sound, a sound that spoke of home and safety and all they had built together. "I love you," Benjamin said, as he had said countless times over the years. "I love you too," Hannah replied, as she always did. In 1908, Benjamin's health began to fail more seriously. His heart was weakening, the doctor said, worn out from years of stress and the lingering effects of war injuries. He tired easily and had to give up most of his ranch duties, though he still insisted on reviewing the accounts and offering advice to James. Hannah nursed him with the same fierce determination she had brought to everything else in her life. She made sure he ate properly, that he rested, that he did not push himself too hard. The children visited regularly, bringing grandchildren who filled the house with noise and laughter. On a clear October morning in 1909, Benjamin woke to find Hannah watching him from her side of the bed. "What is it?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am," Hannah said. "How lucky I have been to spend my life with you." "I am the lucky one," Benjamin insisted, as he had insisted for over 40 years. "We are both lucky," Hannah compromised, and they smiled at each other with the perfect understanding of two people who had shared a lifetime. Benjamin's condition worsened as winter approached. He was confined to bed most days, and though he hated the weakness, the dependence, Hannah never made him feel like a burden. She read to him, talked to him about ranch business and family news, and held his hand when the pain was bad. On a cold January night in 1910, with Hannah beside him and his children gathered in the next room, Benjamin felt his heart begin to fail. He was not afraid, not really. He had survived a war, had lived a long and happy life, had seen his children grown and his grandchildren born. He had loved and been loved in return. What more could any man ask for? "Hannah," he whispered, and she leaned close to hear him. "I am here," she said, her hand tight in his. "Thank you," Benjamin said, "for waiting, for loving me, for everything." "Thank you for coming home," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for finding your way back to me." "I would walk 1,000 miles on a broken leg to get to you," Benjamin said, and managed a smile. "Best decision I ever made." He died quietly, peacefully, with Hannah holding his hand and their children keeping vigil. He was 68 years old, and he had lived every year since the war ended as fully as his damaged body would allow. Hannah sat with his body for a long time after he passed, holding his hand and remembering. She remembered the boy who had gone to war full of idealism and fear. She remembered the wounded soldier who had limped home looking like death itself. She remembered the husband and father he had become, the man who had built a life with her despite every obstacle. The funeral was held in the church where they had married, and it seemed like half of Arizona territory attended. Benjamin had been respected and liked, known for his fair dealing and honest business practices. People came from Tucson and beyond to pay their respects, to tell Hannah stories about her husband's kindness and integrity. Hannah endured it all with quiet grace, accepting condolences and thanking people for coming. But it was only when everyone had left and she was back at the ranch, sitting on the porch in the gathering dusk, that she finally let herself fully grieve. She cried for the love she had lost, for the empty space beside her in bed, for all the years they would not get to share, but she did not regret anything. They had been given 43 years together after the war, 43 years that they might not have had. That was enough. It had to be enough. Hannah lived another 12 years, watching over the ranch and her growing family. James ran the operations capably, and the ranch continued to prosper. Alina became a well-known artist in the region, her paintings hanging in galleries in Tucson and Phoenix. The twins both became successful in their chosen fields, Henry in law and Thomas in medicine. She was surrounded by children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the legacy she and Benjamin had built. But she never stopped missing him, never stopped looking at the empty chair beside hers on the porch and wishing he was there to share the sunset. She died peacefully in her sleep in March 1922, at the age of 75. Her children found her in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with Benjamin, a slight smile on her face as if she had died happy. On the nightstand beside her bed was the photograph from 1900, the one showing their whole family gathered together. They buried her next to Benjamin in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates, but someone, probably Alina, had added a line beneath Hannah's name. She never left. And indeed she had not. From the moment she had made her promise to wait, through war and hardship and every challenge life threw at them, Hannah Whitmore Ashford had never left. She had stayed true to her word, to her love, to the man who had limped home from war and found her waiting. Their children and grandchildren continued to run the ranch for generations, each one hearing the story of the wounded cowboy who came home and the woman who waited. It became a family legend, a testament to love and loyalty and the kind of determination that could overcome anything. The ranch still stands today, though much changed from those early days. The original house is preserved as a historical site, and visitors can see the porch where Hannah waited, the bedroom where their children were born, the office where Benjamin kept his accounts. There are photographs on the walls, including the one from 1900, and visitors often remark on how happy the family looks, how you can see the love between Benjamin and Hannah, even in a faded photograph. But the real legacy is not the land or the buildings or even the family business. The real legacy is the love story itself, the proof that even in the darkest times, even when separated by war and distance and injury, true love can endure. It is the story of a man who refused to give up, who walked hundreds of miles on a damaged leg because he had someone waiting for him. It is the story of a woman who kept her promise, who held on through years of uncertainty because she believed in the man she loved. It is a story that still resonates, more than a century later, because it speaks to something fundamental about the human spirit. We all want to believe that love can conquer anything, that loyalty means something, that the promises we make matter. Benjamin and Hannah Ashford proved it was possible. They lived it, day after day, year after year, building a life and a family and a legacy that endures. And on quiet evenings in Oro Blanco, when the sun sets over the desert and the air is filled with the smell of sage and creosote, some people say you can still feel their presence. Not in a ghostly way, but in the warmth of the land itself, in the solid walls of the ranch house, in the enduring strength of the family they created. Because love like theirs does not simply end. It becomes part of the landscape, woven into the very fabric of the place where it flourished. And anyone who visits that ranch, anyone who stands on that porch and looks out over the desert valley, can feel it still. The love of a wounded cowboy and the woman who never left, who waited and believed and built a life that proved sometimes, just sometimes, faith is rewarded and love really does win in the end. Their story is complete, a perfect circle from the moment Benjamin saw Hannah waiting on the porch to the moment they were laid to rest side by side. Their love story finished but never forgotten. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind something far more valuable than land or money. They left behind proof that the human heart, even when broken by war and tested by hardship, is capable of extraordinary things when it finds its match. And that is how it ended, and how it began, and how it will always be remembered. The wounded cowboy came home. The woman had never left. And together, they built something eternal,